When I decided to start renting out my house on Airbnb, I thought it would be an easy way to make some extra cash. But Karen, the HOA president, didn't like that idea one bit. She immediately issued me a fine, claiming that short-term rentals weren't allowed in the community, and she demanded that I shut down my listing. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't going down without a fight, and I had a few tricks up my sleeve. What she didn't expect was that I would uncover her personal vendetta against me, one that dated back years, and use it to not only save my business but also take her down. We sold really appreciate if you would take your time to like this video, subscribe for more videos like these, and comment below if you've ever dealt with an HOA president who tried to take control of your life. Let's hear your stories in the comments. It started with a notification from the HOA. I had just posted my home on Airbnb, thinking it was a great opportunity to bring in some extra income. The listing was simple, no wild parties or wild claims, just a cozy space for travelers looking to enjoy our quiet neighborhood. But within a week, I received a violation notice from the HOA president herself, Karen. Violation of HOA rules. Short-term rentals not permitted, the letter read. Effective immediately, please cease all operations related to the rental of your property on Airbnb. Failure to comply will result in further fines and potential legal action. I couldn't believe it. We had lived in this neighborhood for years, kept to ourselves, and had no issues with anyone. So why was Karen suddenly making a big deal out of my listing? There were no explicit rules about short-term rentals in the HOA documents. I checked. There were vague mentions of neighborhood aesthetics and community standards, but nothing that explicitly prohibited Airbnb-style rentals. I immediately called my wife, Sarah, to talk it through. We had a small mortgage, and this side income was important to us. We didn't want to give up that extra cash so easily, especially when we weren't violating any clear rules. What do you think? I asked her. Should we just take it down? She was skeptical. Karen's probably just trying to mess with you. I don't see why she'd even care. It's not like we're throwing parties or anything. She was right. This didn't make sense. And Karen, always in charge of the HO, had been overbearing in the past. We had a history of minor disagreements, but nothing like this. The next day, Karen herself came knocking on my door. I've noticed your listing, she said, as if it were her business. I need you to take it down immediately. Karen, I've looked through the rules, and I don't see anything that specifically prohibits this. If there's a rule, I'll follow it. But if there isn't, I don't think this is something you can just decide for everyone. Her eyes narrowed. I'm telling you, this is a violation. You are disturbing the peace of this neighborhood. I couldn't understand it. Karen was always a stickler for rules, but this felt like an overreach. And there was something about her tone, something personal, that made me feel like there was more to this than just the rules. That night, I started doing some research into the neighborhood's history with Airbnb rentals. I talked to some of my neighbors, and while many were open-minded, some had mild concerns about short-term renters. But still, there was nothing that clearly banned it. Then I found something that raised a red flag. I dug deeper into Karen's background in the HOA and discovered something I hadn't expected. Karen had tried to buy my house years ago. Not just mine, but several homes in the neighborhood. She had made lowball offers, and when they were rejected, she grew hostile. Some of my neighbors even told me that she had been jealous when I had secured a better property deal than her. But it was all in the past, right? Or so I thought. This new information gave me a new perspective. Karen wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules. She was trying to get back at me for turning down her offers. She didn't care about the rules. She cared about the fact that I had turned down her business proposal years ago, and this was her way of getting revenge. I decided I wasn't going to let her push me around anymore. It was time to play the long game. But before confronting her directly, I needed to gather evidence. I began documenting everything: emails, her previous attempts to buy houses in the neighborhood, and any interaction where she had crossed the line. I even spoke to a few real estate agents in the area who confirmed that Karen had been acting suspiciously, trying to corner certain properties at low prices. After digging into Karen's past and learning about her hidden agenda, I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't just walk up to her and accuse her of being petty and vindictive. I had to outsmart her without giving her the chance to retaliate or claim I was being unreasonable. I started by consulting a real estate lawyer to get advice on how to handle the Airbnb situation and whether Karen had any legal grounds to enforce her demands. The lawyer was clear. Karen didn't have the legal right to shut down my Airbnb listing, and her overreach into my personal property could be seen as harassment. But I didn't want to escalate things to a legal battle just yet. I needed more ammunition. I made it a point to attend the next HOA meeting. Normally, these meetings were nothing special, just a bunch of neighbors talking about yard maintenance and minor issues. But this time, I was prepared to make my move. I knew Karen would be there, and I had a plan to expose her without directly confronting her. As I sat down at the table with the rest of the HOA members, I could feel Karen's eyes on me. She wasn't hiding her frustration, and she was definitely still upset about the Airbnb listing. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had gotten under my skin. The meeting started, and Karen quickly moved to address what she called a disruption to neighborhood harmony, my Airbnb. She started by ranting about the dangers of short-term rentals, claiming they could bring in strangers and create security risks for the neighborhood. But I wasn't buying it. I knew Karen's true motives, and it had nothing to do with safety. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Karen," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm not sure I understand how my property affects the neighborhood. There are plenty of other homes on this street with Airbnb listings, and no one's had any issues. In fact, I've heard nothing but positive feedback from guests who stay here. So why target mine specifically?" The room went silent. Karen's face flushed, and I could see her trying to come up with an answer. But she couldn't, so she quickly changed the subject. But I didn't let her get away with it. "Also, Karen," I added, "I did some research. It seems that some of the previous property offers you made in this neighborhood didn't go as planned. Can you tell us about that? I'm sure everyone would love to hear about your personal interest in our neighborhood properties." A gasp went around the room. Karen looked like she had been caught off guard, and for good reason. I had just dropped a bombshell. She was fuming, trying to maintain composure, but the damage was done. Everyone in the room now knew that there was more to this than just enforcing HOA rules. Karen had a personal vendetta against me, and she had been trying to undermine me for years. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. People began to see through Karen's facade. No one had realized just how manipulative and self-serving she had been until I exposed her. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one she had been targeting. Other neighbors started reaching out to me, sharing their stories of Karen's underhanded tactics. But I wasn't finished yet. It was time to hit her where it hurt, her role as HOA president. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, emails, old property offers, and witness statements from neighbors who had been treated unfairly by Karen. I compiled it into a formal complaint and sent it to the rest of the HOA board members. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative any longer. It was time to hold her accountable. The days leading up to the next HOA meeting were filled with tension. I could feel it in the air every time I crossed paths with Karen. She had no idea what was coming. Her usual smug, superior attitude had shifted slightly, as if she could sense the change in the community. People were starting to talk, and I had just exposed her for what she really was, someone willing to bend the rules and target neighbors for her own personal gain. But now it was time to bring it all to light. I spent the week preparing for the meeting. I contacted several neighbors who had been treated unfairly by Karen, asking them to attend and support my cause. I also gathered all the evidence I had, everything from her shady property offers to her abuse of HOA rules. It was time to show the board exactly what kind of president Karen had been. The meeting room was packed with homeowners. As the meeting began, I sat quietly, waiting for my turn to speak. Karen was already at the front, going over her usual agenda, but I could tell she was watching me out of the corner of her eye. She knew something was up. When the floor was finally opened for public comments, I stood up and walked to the podium, my heart pounding, but my mind sharp. This was it. "Hello, everyone," I began, my voice steady, though I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me. "I'm here today to talk about a personal issue that has been affecting me and, I believe, others in the neighborhood. As many of you know, I've been renting my home out on Airbnb for a while now. A few weeks ago, I received a violation from the HOA, claiming I was in violation of the rules. I was told to shut down my Airbnb listing immediately. But after looking into the situation, I realized that this wasn't just about the rules. This was about something personal." I glanced at Karen, and I could see her tense up. "You see, Karen," I continued, When I started researching the HOA's claims and the history of Airbnb rentals in this neighborhood, I came across something interesting. I found out that Karen here has been trying to buy up properties in this neighborhood for years. She made offers on several homes, including mine, but when those offers were rejected, she didn't take it well. And now she's using her position as HOA president to punish those of us who didn't sell to her. The room went silent. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. I've also gathered statements from other neighbors who've experienced Karen's heavy-handed tactics. She's fined people for small, trivial things like changing the color of their house or putting up a garden, all while turning a blind eye to the real violations happening in the neighborhood. This isn't about enforcing the rules. This is about her personal vendetta. The room was buzzing now. Neighbors were talking among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I could see a few people in the back whispering about how they had been targeted by Karen in the past. It was working. Karen stood up abruptly, but before she could say anything, I held up my hand. I've sent my findings to the board, I said, and I have the support of several residents who are tired of being pushed around. I'm asking the board to take immediate action and remove Karen from her position as HOA president. She has abused her power, and the community deserves better. Karen was fuming. This is a lie, she spat. You're making accusations based on nothing but personal feelings. You have no proof of anything. But I was ready for that. I have proof, I replied, pulling out a folder full of documents. I have emails, property offers, and statements from other residents who have felt the impact of your abusive tactics. The board members looked over the documents, and after what seemed like hours of deliberation, the vote was called. Karen Mitchell, the board president, said, "Your conduct as HOA president has been found to be in violation of HOA policies. You are hereby removed from your position, effective immediately. A new election will be held." The room erupted in applause. Karen's face was a mix of shock and anger, but she had no choice but to leave. The power she once held had been stripped away, and she was finished. As Karen stormed out of the room, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had done it. I had exposed her, and with the support of the community, we had taken back control. The neighborhood was no longer under the thumb of someone who had been using her position for personal gain. The next few weeks were a blur of changes. Karen was officially out of the HO, and for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like a breath of fresh air. The new board was in place, and things were running much more smoothly than I had expected. Neighbors who had been silent for years started speaking up about their own experiences with Karen's overreach, and it was clear we weren't alone in our frustrations. The first community meeting after Karen's removal was a turning point. The room was filled with neighbors who were eager to participate in the decisions that affected their homes, their property, and their lives. No one was afraid of speaking their mind anymore. Karen's influence had crumbled, and with it, the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the neighborhood for so long. The new HOA president, Julie, was a breath of fresh air. She came in with a clear mission to restore balance and fairness to the community. "Our priority is the community," she said during her first meeting. "No one person should ever hold this much power. We are here to serve the people, not the other way around." Julie's leadership was exactly what the neighborhood needed, and for the first time in a long while, the HOA became a source of support, not a burden. We were all part of the decision-making process, and transparency became the foundation of everything. It felt like we were finally in control of our own community again. But there was one thing left to do. I couldn't just walk away after taking down Karen. No, I needed to make sure that something like this would never happen again. I wanted to ensure that Karen's tactics, the bullying, the intimidation, the personal vendettas, were exposed for good. So I took the evidence I had gathered and shared it with the local news. I didn't want Karen to have the chance to quietly slink away and pretend like nothing had happened. A few days later, the story hit the news. HOA president removed after abusing power and targeting neighbors, read the headline. Karen's long history of overreach was finally being exposed to the public. People began to understand the extent of her manipulation and how she had used the HOA to bully residents into doing what she wanted. But what really shocked people was how widespread her influence had been. The local news interviewed several other homeowners who had experienced similar tactics from Karen. People who had been too scared to speak up before were now coming forward, and the story gained traction. It didn't just remain a neighborhood scandal. It turned into a community-wide expose of one woman's abuse of power. As for me, I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a guy who had finally decided to stand up for what was right. But I did realize something. When one person stands up, it can inspire others to do the same. And before long, Karen wasn't just someone who was removed from the HOA. She was a cautionary tale of what happens when power is left unchecked. In the months that followed, the neighborhood began to thrive. People started taking pride in their homes again. The atmosphere was light and welcoming, not full of suspicion and fear. The new leadership of the HOA made sure that no one ever felt powerless again. It wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about creating a place where everyone could live freely. And as for Karen, well, she didn't just fade away. She had to face the consequences of her actions. While she never publicly admitted to her mistakes, the fallout from her corruption was undeniable. Her reputation was forever tainted, and her days of pushing people around were officially over. The biggest lesson I learned was this: don't let someone's power intimidate you. If you see something wrong, speak up. It only takes one person to make a stand, and the ripple effect can change everything. Karen learned that the hard way. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a few months. The neighborhood, once divided and tense, was now thriving. The power that Karen had held over us had crumbled, and in its place, we were building something stronger, a sense of community. I had no idea how much of an impact standing up to Karen would have. It wasn't just about taking down an abusive HOA president. It was about empowering an entire community to speak up and demand accountability. Every time I walked down the street, I saw people chatting on their lawns, neighbors organizing barbecues, and even families planning community cleanups. It was like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. The neighborhood had finally returned to its roots, and we were stronger because of it. The first major event after Karen's removal was the annual neighborhood block party, which for years had been a quiet, lackluster affair. But this year was different. The planning committee, which had once been hesitant to organize, was now energized. People had ideas. They wanted to celebrate their hard-earned freedom from the constant looming presence of HOA regulations. Julie, the new HOA president, was at the forefront of this transformation. She worked with the residents to ensure that everyone had a chance to participate in the planning. It wasn't just a party, it was a statement. The message was clear. We could run things ourselves. We didn't need someone like Karen, who used her position for personal gain, to tell us how to live. As the block party approached, I realized how much my own view of the neighborhood had changed. Before, I had kept to myself, trying to avoid any HOA conflicts. Now, I was involved. I started attending neighborhood meetings, volunteering for events, and even helping out with community projects. I wasn't the only one. More and more people were stepping up and taking charge of the place they called home. The neighborhood was finally a place where everyone's voice mattered, not just the loudest one. When the day of the block party arrived, it was a complete transformation. There were food trucks, kids playing in the street, and laughter filling the air. People were out enjoying each other's company, and the sense of community was palpable. The residents had created something special, something Karen had tried to destroy. I looked around and realized that the war I had fought wasn't just about a Wi-Fi password or an Airbnb listing. It was about reclaiming the spirit of our neighborhood. It was about taking back control from people like Karen, who thought they could dictate our lives with their own personal agendas. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, I stood in the middle of the street, watching the laughter and light spill over the yard. I couldn't help but feel proud. Proud of what we had accomplished. Proud of what we had built. We took down a tyrant, and in doing so, we built something stronger, a real community. And that's how we reclaimed our neighborhood from Karen's reign of terror. By standing up, we proved that no one person should ever control a community. Now we're building something better. If you've ever had a Karen-like neighbor or dealt with an overbearing HO, share your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, and comment if you believe that communities should be about everyone, not just one person trying to take control. Thanks for watching, and remember, stand up for your neighborhood and never let anyone dictate your life.